Do you want to start with 9/11 or maybe tell us what you were doing in New York?
Well, I had been in New York since 77 is when I moved there, and I moved there originally to try to be an actor for theater. So I did that for 10 years. Work here and there, but nothing, that was ever going to go anywhere. So I finally decided after 10 years to get a real job, and I started working for a law firm, a mid-sized law firm up in Midtown. I was a word processor, and I was there 11 years, and in my last year there, in 2001, we started hearing rumors that maybe we were either going to close our doors or merge. And so in June of 2001, they said they were merging with a new larger firm, and not everyone would have their job. But they came up to me and they said, "Do you want you to come with us?" And I said, "Can I think about that?" They said, "Yeah." So I hemmed and hawed. I thought, do I try to go back to theater, or what should I do? Here's a chance to change. I mean, I was still young, and it's like, I finally decided, okay, I'll go with you. And it just so happened that their offices were across from the World Trade Center. So I often go back to that one decision, how that one decision just was to alter the rest of my life, So I'd only been working down there since June, before it happened that September. And I just fell in love with the place. I'd been down there before, every time someone came to visit, I'd be the tour guide. And if you hadn't seen what it was, it's a shame. But, two large towers with this huge, expansive plaza between them where they had, fountains and benches, and just, there was a real community feel about it. You'd assemble a lot of the same people, on the way to work, and I had my routine every day. I lived in Midtown, so I'd get on the subway, go down, get up, and go get a cup of coffee from one of the vendors, in their silver carts, and then go to the newsstand and get a paper. And then I'd go over into the plaza area of the World Trade Center and just sit there and read the paper, drink coffee, watch people, going to work. And kind of fell into that routine, and so I did it the morning of September 11th. And the thing is, which so many people say, the thing that strikes me the most is how beautiful it was that day. Especially sitting outside there. I remember distinctly looking at the blue and thinking, I've never seen a color like that before. It was just so beautiful. So I started at 8:30, and I was on the 23rd floor of the building, and was up there, 15 minutes, and all of a sudden we hear this loud explosion. Well, we didn't even know it was an explosion. It was just this huge, loud sound, and our building shook. And right away for those couple seconds, everyone's, "What is that? Was it thunder? Was it an explosion? What could it be?" And just then a secretary ran into the offices, and she was crying hysterically, saying a plane had hit one of the towers. And when she said that, my first thought was a tiny prop plane, like, a personal little plane. The man may have had a heart attack and crashed in. That's what I was envisioning. And so, to be honest, I wanted to go down mostly out of curiosity to see. So I went to the elevator, and a couple other people did too, and we went down, got down to the lobby, and went out onto the street. And the first thing that hit me as soon as I hit the street was that it was covered with paper, sheets of paper. Paper was everywhere. It really looked like blankets of snow, and papers were coming down from the sky, all the office papers from the tower, just constantly. I remember that was one thing that was a constant through that whole morning, was the paper just fell, sliding down. So right away, that kind of just upset normality right there. And it was kind of like, I don't think I was even thinking at that point, because I started to walk to the street where the towers would be, and I was seeing, chunks of like insulation and metal, and so, just all this, taking in all this stuff. Then I hit Church Street, and I look up, and I see that North Tower, and I mean, I can't begin to describe what that felt like. I can't, because it was just something I had never even imagined.
Yeah, and obviously
before.
not what you were expecting when you walked down there.
And trying to take it all in of, well, couldn't be a small plane. What happened? Da, da, da. Anyway, so by that time they were letting out all the buildings, having people evacuate their office buildings, and so a crowd developed around me, and everyone was doing what I was. We were just staring at the tower. It's like, I guess trying to comprehend, make sense of what we were seeing. And then as we looked more and more, I noticed there were people at the windows. I can remember this one of the worst memories of people hanging out the window, waving like shirts and articles of clothing, their attention like here. And so we're all watching that, and all during this, there's debris just falling down the side of the North Tower. And we're staring, and I noticed then people getting up into the windows. And then I remember at one point when I saw the first person jump, a woman behind me screamed, and my reaction, I just started screaming the word no over and over again. This was without a moment's thought. I started screaming no, no, and I started running towards the North Tower. I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I know my motivation. I was thinking, what if someone was still alive? I didn't want them to be alone. I know that was a pressing obligation for me somehow. And so I ran up the steps into the plaza area and was under a awning from building number 5, stood under there, and then, the North Tower was right across from me, and there was no way I could run across. I mean, now huge pieces of debris and metal just falling, and glass, constantly glass falling and shattering. And, it was, and again, all this happened in split seconds. It was there of, oh my God, I can't get over there. What can I do? Do I try? And then people yelling at me, and it was some security men from building number 5 screaming for me to get in. That awning I was under ran the whole length of the building, so I ran down that and went into building 5 and got kind of caught up into like a herd of cattle. People were just massive people streaming out the door, which was very surreal. So I was back out on Church Street, and I walked down more and closer to the South Tower, and again just stared. And it's it wasn't a thing out of morbid curiosity or anything. It was almost like, in a sense, watching these people make that horrible decision of how their life was going to end, almost as if they deserved some kind of respect for that decision. I know that's what was all going through my head at the time. But then those thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an airplane, the second plane, and another deafening sound. And I looked up to my left, and the plane was coming towards us. And I just couldn't believe how huge it was, how low it was. And I saw that it was heading to the tower. And at that point, I know I started thinking, oh my gosh, it's the air traffic controllers, that they've messed up somehow. So I thought that the plane will pull up in time. It will pull up in time. Of course, when it didn't, that explosion was life-threatening. I mean, we all just started running, literally for our lives. Metal was falling all around us, and horrifying. And at one point I fell to the ground, and people started running on top of me. And I remember thinking at that point, is this how I'm going to die? And I was able to get up, and I kept running. And I remember the one thing, I don't know why I did this, at one point when we were running, I screamed out loud, God save us all. Kept running, and I turned right up to Fulton Street, which would take me up to Broadway, a block from the towers. And as I was running up there, I saw a really heavyset man on his back lying in the middle of the road. And everyone was running by him, and I ran by him. But again, without a moment's thought, I stopped, and I turned around, I ran back to him and knelt down beside him. And it was then I noticed all the blood coming from his head. He had a horrendous head injury. Something had hit him, some of the debris. As I saw that, someone else joined me, and I remember someone handed me a jacket. They said, "Here, take this." And I put the jacket over the open wound, and the man next to me put his hands on top of mine, and we were there holding it. And just then the ambulances were starting to arrive, and so people were shouting to the ambulance, to get up, to get up. And at some point I remember I took my finger, his mouth was filled with soot and grime, and I remember cleaning out his mouth for some reason, and laying next to him was his watch had come off. I remember taking that and putting it in his pants pocket. And then the one thing I didn't do, which really is my biggest regret of that day, he had a workman's, an employee ID tag around his neck. And I didn't think to look at it to see what his name was or where he worked. I wish now that I had. I'm sure he probably didn't survive, but I would want his family to know people were with him when he was injured. So after that happened, the ambulance got up and we helped them pick him up. He was a heavyset man. We put him on a gurney, and as they were pushing him towards the ambulance, I went up by his ear and I was just stroking his arm, and I was saying, "You'll be okay." Now, he was unconscious the whole time, but I just kept whispering, "You'll be okay, you'll be okay." So the ambulance took off, and I walked up then to Broadway. And now the streets are crowded no matter where you go. And I had his blood on my hands. So an EMS worker came up. She thought it was me. And, I said, "No, it's someone else's." And she had me sit down on a curb, and she went to get water or something to clean my hands. And when she came back with it and she was cleaning them, I remember looking her, in the eyes and saying, "What's going on?" And I remember her saying, "I don't know, but this is awful." After that happened, I got up and saw some of my other coworkers, and we embraced. And at that point, I thought of my parents who were living here in Millersville. I thought of them seeing this on TV, and I had left my phone up in the office. So I started going up to people I saw with cell phones, but nobody was getting any service, So I started to walk north a couple blocks, hoping to find a phone that worked, and I ended up running into a deli restaurant, and just screamed to the man, "Can I use your phone?" And he just pointed where it was. So I went, and I couldn't remember my parents' phone number, but I could only remember a friend's work number. So I called him and said, "Call my parents in Millersville. Tell them I'm okay." And when I hung up and stepped out of the restaurant, that's when the first tower collapsed. And we heard it, everyone that was there in the street, we heard it, didn't know what it was, but I looked, and then all of a sudden there was that giant wall of dust and debris, rapidly coming towards us, and not having any idea what that was, just turned around and took off and just ran. Don't ever remember running so fast. And I was able to outrun it and finally stopped. And so now, by then I was a number of blocks up from the World Trade Center. And living in Midtown, I had no choice but to walk home. So I just started walking. And that was a very surreal, eerie sensation. The streets were still packed, and everyone was walking almost like zombie-like, just walking in mass. And there were no sounds. Nobody was saying anything. So there were radios on, though, car radios. And as I was walking up, I heard Pennsylvania and the Pentagon. So it was that moment I knew, oh, this is something, I didn't know what it was, but I knew this is something. So finally got home, up to my little studio in Midtown, and just kind of went in and collapsed, and tried to think, what should I do now? Sitting there, and there was a 12-step meeting I used to go to before we moved downtown, a lunchtime, and it was after 12, but I knew they would be there, or some people would be there, and it was walking distance at a church in Midtown. So I walked over there, and as I was walking in, I heard one of the people say, "I'm worried about the people who work there." And then she said, "Oh, but one of them just came in." So, everyone turns and looks at me, and there's probably about 20, 25 people. And I went and I sat down, and I just started to talk, and that's when I started to cry for the first time. Just sobbed, and between the sobs, trying to explain everything I'd seen. And I remember there was a man in a chef's jacket. I hadn't seen him before. I didn't know who he was. He was sitting to my left. He got up and put his chair next to me and put his arm around me and just held me while I cried and talked. And he just sat there through the rest of the meeting. And then when it was over, everyone coming up and hugging me and, supporting. And it was just, I felt safe for the first time there.
Did you lose people that you worked with?
We were a big law firm. We lost one lawyer only because he was a volunteer fireman in the town he lived in, and so he ran into the towers, to help. Yeah. So, yeah. Two young men in my apartment building, they were gone, and that was such a shame. There was like 4 guys that lived in this apartment on the first floor, and I called them the frat boys because they were always having parties and things, and they looked like they were just out of college. And I didn't even realize 2 of them, that I'd see them every morning as we walk out the building. I didn't know they worked down there. And so one day I was coming home a day or so after 9/11, and one of the roommates was pasting their photos on the window of the apartment building. So I knew right then. So at least I know I didn't know them personally. I had a face to put to it. Yeah, it kind of brought it home. We set up a huge memorial in the lobby, candles, flowers that lasted about a week. Kept burning the candles and stuff. It was nice.
When were you able to go back to where you worked and kind of see? How long did that take before you could see kind of the aftermath of like the plaza and where you used to go?
It's funny. We had to set up temporary offices in a hotel in Midtown. Our building, the only thing had been broken windows and filled with dust. So once that was cleaned up, we were able to go back in November. But the weekend before we were to start, I wanted to go down to Ground Zero myself for the first time and see, just what you're saying, see. So I took the subway down, and when I stepped up onto the street, I mean, the smell of smoke was just, everywhere and burning. And, I was on Broadway again, so it was a block down from me. And I stood on the corner. They had a barricade, police barricade. You couldn't go down towards it. So I was standing on the corner and just looking at it, and I just started sobbing there on the corner. And next thing I know, I feel an arm go around my shoulders, and I look up, and it's one of the policemen. And he said, "Just let it out." And he just held me, those kind of things. And once I kind of composed myself, I told them my story, and I said, "Could I go down?" And they said, "Wait a minute." They went and checked, and they said, "Yeah, it was." Mm-hmm. So I got to do what people weren't able to do. They took me right down, right to the edge of it, and I had brought some flowers to lay there, and the policemen were great. They took me down there, and then they just kind of backed off and left me there, and just kind of my moment. But it was grief, mourning, everything. I mean, everything. You mentioned the plaza and everything I loved. It was just all this smoldering, burning mess. But then once we started working again, that next week, I'd come up out of the subway and start crying the minute I hit the street, because, you could still smell the smoke and stuff. And so I lasted 3 weeks, and I finally had to just say, I quit. I can't do this anymore. So I just quit my job.
What did you do after that?
Well, it's interesting. I was able to collect disability, actually, so I didn't have to worry too much. I started writing about 9/11, about myself and what I had experienced and what the city was like. And some of these were emails that I sent out to people. Well, the day after 9/11, that next morning, I got up and for the first time listened to all the messages on my machine and got on the computer and saw all the emails. And, I knew there was no way I could respond to everyone. So I was going to type one general email that just said, I'm okay, and send that to everyone. Well, I sat at the keyboard and I just started telling the story, even without really thinking it through, just putting everything I talked about the day before in that meeting, I put down in words and sent that out. And within a while, I started getting responses from my friends thanking me, telling me keep writing. It gave them a perspective they didn't have, and they started sending their emails to other people. And I was getting emails from people I didn't even know, and everyone was saying the same thing: keep writing, thank you. So I sent out maybe 3-4 emails over the course of the next few weeks, but I kept writing too, just for myself. What a day was like, this or that. So then finally the next January, I had this big stack of written words. And one day I was actually going to that 12-step meeting I mentioned, and I had the thought, I wonder if this would work as a theater piece. And that thought kind of came out of nowhere. But there was a friend of mine, another actor, well, working actor, who I respected, and I told him what I was thinking. I said, "Can you read and tell me what you think?" And he said, "Yeah." So I gave him all the stacks of paper one day, and he called me that night and said he had read it and thought it would make a great play, and he'd like to direct it. So I ended up.
Before?
Huh?
Had you written before at all, or was that?
I had just for myself,
yeah.
But but never steadily, and so there I was all of a sudden, beginning of 2002, then writing a play. So I spent the next 2 years on that play, writing the play, doing workshops. It was a one-man show, and it was basically just me on the stage telling my story, like I've done so many times since. Yeah. And we took it out to LA and did it out there. And that was really had a profound effect on me in LA, because when it was over, there would always be some people waiting outside, and they would thank me and talk, and we would be talking, and inevitably they'd start telling me their story of 9/11. And it gave me a real awareness and appreciation for the fact that everybody has a story, no matter where you were, you have a story, and it affected you. So yeah, I gained that from being out there, and then we came back to New York, and did it off Broadway for a month, and then that ended in August of 2003, and I had to decide, what do I do now? And much to my surprise, I thought, I'll move to Millersville, because I'd been in New York 26 years. I never thought I would leave that city. I loved living there. But the one thing, my parents had retired here, and so I'd see them maybe 2 or 3 times a year, which, to be honest, at that point is fine, But after living through 9/11, I just wanted to be close to family. So that's what prompted me. I moved out here. From that initial thought, it took a month, and I had a U-Haul packed, and I moved here. I didn't have a place to live. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a job. I just kind of came here. Yeah.
Came home.
And I've been here since. Yeah.
Do you think the writing of the play and the acting and going through that was kind of a therapy for you, or was it difficult to keep going?
Well, no, it was therapy.
Over and over again.
It had a positive and negative effect. It was healing and helpful, putting that down, and yet it also diverted my attention from really dealing with inner stuff. And it wasn't until I moved out here finally, about a year or so later, where the effects of PTSD were really starting to manifest themselves.
On your website that you kind of talk about that.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of take us through, I guess, how it still affects you, or how it affected you?
Well, the way it does is I mean, I think of 9/11 every day still. You know, to some degree. I mean, sometimes it's just a passing thought, you know, or other times it'll be, you know, a specific memory or image coming to my head. So that, uh, trouble sleeping, which I still have, you know, waking up so many different times during the night. Kind of living like I feel like I'm always on edge, put it that way, always, you know, anticipating something. When you know, I notice when I do this, I go to Starbucks a lot and meet some friends. When I do that, I'm aware every time I keep looking at the doors. You know, every time someone comes in, I look to see who it is.
Yeah.
And there was a period of nightmares. They're now few and far between, luckily. But and it also kind of tended to isolate me. I isolated a lot. You know, with just all, you know, it was a grieving process, a mourning process, you know, just for the people I saw die, but also for the life I lost because, you know, my life was never the same after
Right.
that. So, yeah, so having a service dog, having Ranger, that's helped tremendously, you know, yeah, just having that companionship.
And you also, I guess now, do public speaking regarding 9/11, kind of teaching
I
students
do.
about it. And,
In fact, I just got a request to go Clarion, I think it is, Pennsylvania, and to speak to a conference full of mental health uh, professionals that speak on PTSD
okay.
and how it's affected me.
Would you say more good has come out of your experience or more bad?
Yeah, well, more good in a lot of ways. Bad in that it's weird to say, even because you know I have things to be happy about, but it's kind of like I live with a certain sadness every day that just kind of weighs my heart down. That yeah, that's just their sadness for yeah for the loss I saw for, again for my loss. Just yeah, kind of a sadness. So that's kind of a negative, but you know I've learned to appreciate things you know much more. You know.
I guess I kind of just wanted to know with the students that you talk to, do you find that a lot of them don't understand what happened now since it's been
Students are
such
the
a
best.
while?
No, students are the best to speak to. I've spoken to middle school and high schoolers, and they are the most respectful audience,
Oh, good.
and they just they
That's good to
cling to
hear.
it. Well, I found out, you know, the teachers tell me they really do have a thirst to know about it because when you think about it, the world they're living in is all because of that one day, you know. So yeah, they're great, and I'll never forget the very first time I did. I spoke to an auditorium full of high schoolers, and you could hear a pin drop. You know that one of the teachers mentioned, and afterwards I stood down there for people to come up, and the kids were just coming up and taking my hand, and were just so genuinely thankful, and I'll never forget this one guy who kind of looked like a big blonde jock guy came up to me crying, and he just hugged me and you know so that those kind of moments are just priceless. Yeah, that's some of the good that
Yeah.
that I get to see.